welcome to this week's review of My Her Academia Vigilantes. This week I'm reviewing the manga volume 8, and we kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the positives and the headline positives. All the big things I'm discussing over the course of this video. I love the creativity that is on show in this volume. I enjoy the symbolism and the metaphors that we get throughout it, and I like the backstory that we get with Eraserhead. It really does feel like this volume has just flown by. That might be because I've been reading stuff ahead of time, so I'm kind of a bit ahead of these things, and also the fact the volume kind of loiters a little bit towards the start of it, but regardless, here we are at the end of the volume, time for the big review, and before we get into it, I just want to say, look, by now you're probably well aware that there's some weird stuff going on with YouTube at the moment. I'm just going to say here, like and subscribe. Because of that, we've lost probably about 6 or 7 subscribers over the course of the past month or so. I don't know if this is connected to it. We have regained some, but we now are at a state where we're further back now than we were about 6 weeks ago. So, there's that. In any case, let us get on to the review itself and say that when it comes to creative flares within the My Her Academia series, I often praise it because I think that there is a lot more creativity going on with this series than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And Vigilantes is one I will admit I do praise a lot more in this regard than the main series. Maybe because this is a side series, they get more creative freedom and they're able to do stuff that's just more out there and crazy and weird than they would do in the main series. Maybe it's the fact that it is a spin-off and it has something to build off from, that it can do these wilder, stranger and weirder things. Maybe it's the fact that, well, the main series has a very specific story in mind and is a lot more of a typical shonen anime kind of thing, so they have less opportunity to get wild and crazy. This volume is probably one of the wildest and most visually creative that I've seen of Vigilantes thus far. And that's not me getting into some kind of broader discussion about Vigilantes as a series or trying to do some kind of comparison between this series and the main series. Like, it's going to be a long way off before I do any kind of Vigilantes versus My Hero Academia series video review thing coming. You know, that's going to be a long way off. But for the here and now, I will say is that I've always liked the creative flares in Vigilantes, more so than the main series, but there's fewer opportunities for that given where we are in the anime, so whatever. It's still, regardless, this is a volume that really does reinforce that just creative madness that we have here. Yes, sometimes it is more of a punchline or just some kind of weird, surreal concept. Like, in past volumes, we've had the train villains. Towards the start of the series, we had the kaiju reference monsters. We had a Gamera and a Mothra rip-off thing, and sometimes this creativity just comes down to the powers that certain characters have, and this is a volume which features the Crawler trying to save Little Red Riding Hood from the big bad wolf, and also features a hero that looks like Prince off of Raspberry Beret and many other songs as a mentor to past versions of future heroes. And whilst these are cute visual references, and yes, the Prince thing isn't just a reference to Prince, it's also a reference to some characters from JoJo. I don't know, I don't watch that series. I am just blown away by the creativity that is here, and it's creative decisions which in my opinion are done in a way which don't feel like it's showing off. On with other series, you get this a feeling now and again that when they do stuff that is this weird or this creative, it is done with a sense of, you see what we did there? See what we're referencing there? And here that doesn't really feel like that is the case. Yes, it's done in a way that's supposed to draw attention to it because these are central figures in the scenes that they take part in. Some of them are supposed to make you laugh, like I say, some of these are more punchlines. Some of them are just wild and weird and odd, but again, it's done in a way which doesn't draw too much attention to it. It isn't done with so much of a wink and a nod as other series would do so. It's not being done as a, hey, you see what we're doing there? And if there is any showing off, it's more in a case of, oh, look at this neat design that we made, or oh, hey, doesn't this thing look neat? More so than, again, it is at see what we did there. And that I can respect. Like, for way too much of the past decade and a half with a lot of superhero media and just media in general, there has this been almost Joss Whedon-esque thing of this, see what we did there, oh, we're making meta references to what we're seeing here. We don't get that. This is just, here's the gag. The gag is that this bad guy looks like the big bad wolf. The gag here is that the guy just looks like Prince. That's it. And there is no obvious attempt to go, oh, that guy looks like that guy from that thing from a long time ago, but he's here now. Oh. No attention's drawn to it. It's just a thing that exists in this world because it's a thing that exists in this world. And I'm fine with that. And this creativity is not just centered around these gag moments. You do see it in other elements as well. I find the design and presentation of Oboro to be just kind of neat. I'd hate to use that word, but I like what they've done with him. I'm fairly certain that they didn't go into that much detail as to what his power and his presentation as a trainee hero was in the main series, and we had that brief flashback bit. They might have done it in the manga, but certainly from what I remember from the anime, you know, we got the final flashback sequence that we had with him, but there wasn't much else there. And here, whilst we do have a design which is a very heavy reference to Sun Wukong, it's one that doesn't go full Monkey King, and it isn't doing it in a way which is drawing reference to that character, or to the fact that it is a heavy reference to Sun Wukong. It exists because that's the design that he's gone for, that's the kind of idea that he's gone for, and yet it still has enough of its own original entity to it, where it just feels like a case of, okay, let's just do this because I know how to fight like this. You know, like, almost like there was on the application form for the stuff that you wanted. It was a case of, well, if you've got a quirk that helped you float around on a thing, we've got a stick you could use, like Sun Wukong. Okay, I'll do with that. And we'll add like the flight goggles and stuff and make it look more like I'm a flying ace or something. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. And I like the way that it's presented. I like the action sequence we then get with him. And additionally, whilst this series isn't the one to create the designs of the younger Eraserhead or President Mike, the way that it shows them in the panel work and within this episode itself feels authentic. As I've mentioned in the past, and I'll probably mention within this review, it does feel as though they did a fine job in creating what genuinely feels like younger versions of these characters. And it wasn't just versions of themselves that just were smaller. Like, they're fundamentally the same character, except now they have less facial hair and they're just shorter. It feels as though you can go from here and just trace a line through hypothetical life events to make them into the characters that we see in the main series. Like, it feels as though there's a genuine continuity here. We see them now, yes, you can see those versions, those later versions of themselves here, but there's elements of them that are still unfinished. Character developments and aspects of their characters need to grow and evolve, and that is honestly great, and I really can respect that fact. I will admit that maybe it doesn't go quite as far as I would like to in terms of just spending time with these characters and getting us a chance to really see them as this earlier version of themselves. That's something that we'll discuss later on in the video, but I do have to take my hat off, if I ever really wore them, to the fact that this is able to create what does feel like an authentic bunch of teen characters in a way which feels far more authentic than even the main series, which is focused almost exclusively around those characters. Yes, we'll get more time with them in the next volume, but for what little I've seen, we're pivoting straight into the action and the darkness, so it is what it is. We enjoy what we have with what we got here, but still, like I say, there is a creativity here that I just think is going to the next level, that is beyond just here's Prince, and here's the big bad wolf, and here's the Thomas the Tank Engine villain. That the art style and how it uses its art and its design is maturing slightly. I don't think this is going to be some kind of grand, definitive twist, for want of a better phrase, when we'll see something new and something different than this go down a far more abstract and just deeper path. But for the here and now, we are seeing a use of visual metaphors in this season, which I think is some of the best that we've seen in this series in a very long while. Aside from maybe stuff that we saw in the last season of the main series, which I'm not going to give away for anyone who hasn't seen or read that stuff yet. But this, and I apologise if this sounds like either damningly faint praise or just damning outright, but My Hero Academia isn't really a series that goes in for this kind of stuff. It isn't one that really goes that far into visual metaphors or visual similes or anything deeper like that. This isn't to say that it is lacking or devoid of subtext in general or deeper symbology, or it's just something that's just very flat and just is very obvious. It isn't. But from my experience, particularly bearing in mind I've gone back to rewatch some of it, those visual metaphor moments, they feel either very of the moment or they are explained in the moment that they appear. The fact that Midoriya achieves his great physical goals ahead of the UA trial thing, that happens at dawn, which symbolises a brighter, bolder future ahead of him. He is entering into a new era. The hands on Tomura symbolise the weight of his actions and the sin that he has committed in his past, as well as reinforces the man-child line from the first series. We have other things like that, which I'd love to discuss, but again, we're getting into spoilers for the main series, and I don't want to spoil anything, even though there's a good chance that, well, if you're watching this, you probably know them, but if you know them, you know, and that when this stuff comes up, like I say, in the first moment, the thing with Midori on the beach, that is you might not have noticed it, but your brain did, great, but it doesn't really evolve beyond that moment. The second one with Tomura on the hands, that is something that is explained at great depth far later on in the series. And when we have other similar kind of things with Tomura, we ain't got the visual metaphors, you've got characters explaining what those metaphors mean, if not directly, then indirectly. This series, or rather this volume, doesn't go in for that. It has probably a moment which, yes, I'm going to get onto it, and as good as those previously mentioned moments are, they don't really speak to the subtext in the way that this volume does. Or at least, not in a way that the stray cat does. Yes, I'm going to talk about that damn cat again, because it's the smartest thing this series has ever done, because it represents so much about this series and the main series. It represents how Eraserhead sees Crawler. It represents how Eraserhead sees Eri in the main series. It represents how Eraserhead saw himself as a teenager and as a teenager in that moment. And as a teenager, it represented what was in his mind the limit of his potential, that he can't even save a kitten. It sets the stage for what comes next, because if he can't save a kitten, then he can't save people, which fans for the main series know what's coming next, and anyone that doesn't, it foreshadows a darker future for that character and for people around them. Yes, you could argue that I'm taking this stuff far too far, but I'm following a train of thought that the series has allowed to set off from the station. You might be right, I'm taking this far too far, but there is room to take it far. It is something that is present throughout this volume. That bloody cat keeps coming up time and time again, and it is in God knows how many different scenes as we go through this bloody volume. And again, no shade to the main series, because it does have these brilliantly abstract, metaphorical moments, but again, when they do happen, they're either very specific and ultimately their meaning is limited to that volume or that episode or that moment, or it's something that's explained in the moment it comes in. The stuff with the cat really isn't. It is something that you sit there and then you start to realise, oh, it means this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing, and it keeps coming up and it keeps being brought forward, either literally by having that cat in some context brought up in that scene, or it's something that is constantly in the back of your mind because of the fact that he's had such a great job in setting it up. And it helps to make the backstory and personal history that we get with Eraserhead that much more engaging. Without it, it would still be enjoyable, but it helps to take it to that next level, because that cat, again, is present. It reinforces the idea and what they represent over and over and over again. It wasn't a one and done deal. This wasn't Midoriya stood on the beach shouting. This is something that's saying, remember the cat, remember what it represents, because this is going to be relevant not just to this storyline, but what comes later in this series and in the main series itself. This is a period where we see Eraserhead for who he was, and who he may still be deep down. And this is a storyline that recontextualizes him in a way which is positive and makes sense. This isn't like the recontextualization that we got with Stain from a couple volumes ago. This shows Eraserhead in a far better light and helps to give greater context to some of the things he did in the main series. Yes, you can argue that the continuity doesn't quite work. That's not to say that it goes non-canon or undermines anything, but how some of those moments were presented visually don't quite make sense, but even still, it makes sense on a deeper character level. And sure, you can say that calling this a recontextualization of his character a bit much, and it's really stretching the definition of that word, because it is still something, I would argue, that does change how we see Eraserhead and his evolution as an individual. That is because, in the end, this is a brilliant hero and teacher that we know from the main series, who we now realise is just as crummy and just as normal as the rest of us and our main character in this series. He wasn't born great. He was born human. Yes, he has a superpowered, super OP quirk, but at the end of the day, we are dealing with a character who really did not believe in himself, and that crippling self-doubt is something that really held him back. He has vulnerabilities that are human. His weakness doesn't come from the fact that if he stares for too long it makes his eyes hurt, or if he uses his powers too long his legs fall off, or whatever. We are seeing that his vulnerabilities and the things that are holding him back are psychological. They are human. There are things that every young man at that age will have to deal with some variation of it in their life. He's just another man who wants to do good and save people, yet he has not found the strength to save himself yet. He knows that, and it's eating him up inside. And this presentation of him isn't cliched, is not cliched. Yes, some people argue that this is kind of stuff we've seen in different forms in different series, but at least it feels as though he is a younger, different version of himself. That he is not just a smaller version of his adult self. He's younger, he's unrefined, he has not made the full journey to make him the man that we know of him from this series and the main series. He's dealing with a weight of responsibility that he's trying to come to terms with. And seemingly, this is all going to go a very dark way, which is really going to weigh on him, and is stuff that weighs on him well into the main series itself. It is showing that this character has far more to him than meets the eye, that he isn't just the aloof kind of strict teacher that we know from the main series who has not yet become the teacher yet. It shows that there is a human side to him that just isn't explored, and certainly not in the main series. And it continues to show, much like the main series, that behind the superhero names and behind the villain names, that there are human beings with their own struggles and personality issues that they're trying to fight through and overcome. Which I think is really great for a series like this, and it adds a level of depth I think that Vigilantes more broadly has been needing, but that's a discussion for a later point. And now we come to the negatives. Now, this would be the moment in a review like this where I do the headline negatives, but I think that at the end of the day, all the problems that I have with this ultimately come down to the same core problem, and that is the fact that the pacing of this volume just feels off, and as a result of that creates a series of problems which, hey, I'm going to discuss now. So the pacing issue that I have ultimately comes down to the fact that, well, it really doesn't feel like it takes enough time to truly get into the drama. 5 of the 9 episodes that we get here are spent with the hangover for the previous volume. It is spent wrapping up stuff from the SkyEgg, which, yes, narratively, this is stuff that needed to happen. This is stuff that is essential to this overall story and the backstory of 2 major characters. But to have over half the event of this volume dedicated to it feels weird to me, especially bearing in mind that what we then get into is just so detached from that. It's almost mind-boggling. Everything that we learn with Knuckle Dust and Number 6 has no real bearing on anything that we end up getting with Eraserhead and Crawler thereafter. Yes, the stuff we get in there is still good, it's still great. Yes, the stuff with Captain Celebrity, leaving to return to America, and all the fun and games that comes with all of that is still good. But it feels very weird to me that, again, over half of this volume is spent wrapping up stuff from the prior volume, and with some of those episodes feeling like they could have been half the length and still be just as good. Now, to be fair, this isn't going to be an issue if you are reading it as it was coming out at the time, when it comes out weekly or fortnightly or whatever, where the volume structure doesn't exist and it's just episode after episode after episode. But as someone who reads it as a volume, it doesn't feel right to have 2 very different storylines in the same volume. It really does feel as though you could quite easily have just come up with, I don't know, 5 episodes or 4 episodes or whatever, just filler, then dedicated an entire volume to the stuff with Eraserhead. As I think that itself would have made for a better thing, and it gives me this nasty feeling in the pit of my stomach that when I start reading the next volume, all the stuff of Eraserhead is just going to wrap up midway through it, and then it'll be back to wacky shenanigans with Crawler and his friends, and that'll, whilst it might well make for a fine palate cleanser from that point on, it'll feel very weird that such a important storyline is split over 2 volumes for reasons which come down to structure, and it would just feel odd. Now, to be fair, it isn't like there's this big tonal whiplash going from one storyline to the other, but there is just that strange feeling of going from very 2 different storylines from one to the other like this. There is no ramp up, there's no shifting gears. We go from the possibility that a Knuckle Duster might have been blown up and killed, and the revelation as to who number 6 is, to Eraserhead giving a flashback sequence and thinking about his past. And again, that stuff is great, but by the time we get there, there isn't much time left. You only have about 4 episodes or so to establish the characters of this moment and of this period in their life. And then as soon as we get to the end of the volume, we're setting up for the cliffhanger where things will go wrong. And because of that, it means that they don't properly establish the personalities of Eraserhead's friends really as effectively as it should do. It does it efficiently, but I don't really think it does it effectively. It does it on a surface level. It does it in a way which establishes what those characters are in almost a Saved by the Bell high school sitcom sense. We know from a personality standpoint what Present Mike is like at this moment. We know what Ouroboros is at this moment because they go out of their way to establish over and over and over again that Ouroboros is just a bloody nice bloke. But aside from that, we don't really get much of a great insight to any of them. Yes, Eraserhead is the main focus of all of this, and the stuff that we get of Eraserhead is still largely good. We are still seeing what is definitely an earlier version of him, one who will grow and develop into the person that we know of him from the main series and from this series. And it does do great things to establish a great contrast to who he was in the past versus who we know from the future. And it does help to show that evolution with him has grown with time. But with that said, with the other characters, like I say, with Ouroboros, we just get repeated time and time again, he's just the nicest bloke you'd ever want to meet. And whilst that's good, and whilst that does go some way to give us the emotional stakes in the character for later on when the big bad stuff comes along, it still doesn't really feel as though we got much of a grasp on that character to the extent that we would do, bearing in mind just what an important figure they are in Eraserhead's life. I mean, I think more could be done here, but from what little I've read of the next volume, we don't really seem to get it there either. Like, they could easily, like I say, you could easily have a thing where you split this up differently. You had 4 episodes at the end of the SkyEgg stuff of just wacky banter stuff. Then you did an entire volume that was dedicated to the stuff with Eraserhead. Maybe with a few bits and pieces here and there. Maybe what some people might consider filler episodes. Just so that we have greater sense as to who these characters are. So you get a better idea as to who they are and where they came from and how they came to be here. But instead, we get something that just feels just really hyper-condensed due to just how few episodes they really have to do all of this. And as such, you end up having this feeling of just waiting for the guillotine to drop. Or that moment in reality TV shows where you know someone's going to get through to the next stage, but they just drag it out with the dramatic bum-bum, bum-bum music playing in the background. It feels as though we're just treading water for an uncomfortably long segment of the end of this volume because it's not really doing much else to establish this character apart from saying Ouroboros a bloody nice bloke. Which is a shame. I really wish that this had been an entire volume dedicated to just the stuff with Eraserhead, or hell, do 2 dedicated to Eraserhead. Have one where it's just the kind of like, this is like its own self-contained spin-off, and then in the next one you get the big dramatic, oh my god, what's happening moment. And which we are kind of getting, but we're only getting it like a quarter of what it feels it should be, but still. With that said, let us get to the overview and say that, all things considered, I think that this is a great volume. I think it is head and shoulders above the previous one, and feels far more focused. I do have issues with the structure. I still think that it should have been either 2 separate volumes, or the SkyEgg stuff should have been shorter, significantly shorter. But I still think there is great material within it. I do wish there was a better balance here. I wish we would have got more time with Eraserhead and the others, less time with the SkyEgg Aftermath. But this is overall a very fine volume that at the end of the day is undermined by mechanical issues, more so than creative ones for me. With that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, reading comments from the previous video, that one Cold Glass Guy. And we got a comment from Big X1 that says, this volume takes a while to get going, but when it gets going, it sets up for one of my favourite storylines in the whole of My Her Academia. Thanks for your comment, and it is looking like this is going to be a potentially interesting arc. My only issue with it is potentially the structure of it and how it's going to hang together narratively, but from what I can see, everything from a story beat perspective is fine, even though it's probably going to be a good couple months before I end up coming back to read through it. Next week's video, I'm not going to say what it is, 1, because I don't want to spoil it, and 2, because I don't want to promise anything, because this is a video that's turning out it might be bigger than I originally intended it to be. So with that in mind, you know, there's a chance I might have to do something else instead, try and see if there's any other OVAs that I can talk about to fill that gap nonetheless. I know there's a 2-parter, but I want to save that for a special occasion. Beyond that, we'll soon see where we go, because after next week, we should be getting into the return of My Her Academia. It feels like it's just come around so quickly. But I suppose that's mostly due to the fact we've only just come off having the Vigilantes TV series. So, you know, it's coming. It's coming up. It's coming up. It's coming up. It's there. And it'll be here soon. In any case, let me know what you thought about this one down in the comment section down below. Let me know what you thought about this particular volume. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe. YouTubers being weird again. It's starting to suppress videos, because at this point I think it thinks I am now a Nativity 3 Dude Where's My Donkey channel, given that has, once again, blown up a little bit. Yeah, YouTube, I suppose, now wants me to spend the rest of my life making videos about Nativity 3 Dude Where's My Donkey. God, don't you just love YouTube? Anyway, like, favourite, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!